much, and good morning, good afternoon, depending on where folks are located. My name's Donna Dorzynski, and I'll be your trainer for today. It's always a privilege to work with the Barnett attendants in the area of TMF. So today's session is called TMF for Sponsors, Setup, and Maintenance. Today's title is Why Are They Important and How Do We Organize Them? So this really is intended as a kind of a basic foundation class. We talk about the changing regulatory climate and how this links into essential documentation practices for sponsor trials. We look at the components of the TMF, and I make some recommendations for some policy on TMF and TMF management. And then the last section is really a discussion of how to maintain and perform quality control of your TMF. So I always like to start with the first. If it didn't get documented, it did not happen. I think all of us have been hearing that since we started in our careers. If we don't have evidence that we actually did something, there's no convincing someone else that it was actually done. And so our health authorities, when they inspect us, they're looking for evidence that you did what you said you were going to do. So I just want to start with a little bit of a rationale, because the TMF is really a story. So I like to equate the TMF as a story. And basically, it begins with the very start of your study, and it ends with the archive of the TMF. And everything in between is the story of your study. And if you think about your TMF as the story, it's really easy to decide, well, does this go in the TMF or does this not go in the TMF? If it contributes to the story, then it's part of the TMF. And if it doesn't contribute to the story, then it's probably not relevant to the TMF. And you can really use that for all aspects of managing your trial master file. It is referred to in the Code of Federal Regulations, not necessarily as a TMF, but as documentation. The EU directives and ICH guidelines actually call it out as a TMF. So what's the definition of TMF? Well, I like to think of it as a standalone set of documentation that really doesn't need any other explanation. So for me, a really successful FDA inspection or EMA inspection doesn't really involve much conversation with the investigators. It's more of a experience where the investigators or the health authority inspectors are looking at the documentation that you have, whether it's paper that you give to them or it's them looking in your eTMF. Either way, the story is in the documentation. So really, a conversation is just maybe answering some questions or explaining things a little bit better. But that documentation by itself is really what the health authorities will be assessing. It's that documentation that allows the health authorities to evaluate the conduct of the trial, to confirm the integrity of your data, and make sure that the trial was conducted in compliance with GCP. That's really the purpose of the TMF. So really, think of your TMF as the articles of inspection. And health authority inspection is really an inspection of the TMF. They're coming in, what they need to see is predominantly what sits in your TMF. It supports the story of what happened. And I love it when I work with a company and the functional area groups all say to me, oh, well, clinical manages our TMF. We don't really need to do anything about TMF. Clinical handles that. And what I always say to that group is, oh, so you're completely irrelevant to the conduct of the study? Because for somebody to say, well, I don't generate TMF content, what they're saying is I'm really irrelevant to what happened with the study, right? So finance is probably irrelevant to the conduct of the study because finance doesn't really do anything related to the conduct of the study other than make sure the bills get paid and make sure the money gets managed, right? So when you think of TMF content, you think of those groups that contribute to the story, right? They write a chapter. There's lots of chapters in the story. And your TMF is its collected output from all of the functional areas. So TMF is not just clinical. TMF is just not regulatory. TMF is every functional area within an organization that manages the study or contributes to the study in any way. So we're talking about medical writing. We're talking about regulatory affairs. We're talking about safety and biosciences, data sciences. We're talking about safety. We're talking about vendor management. We're talking about all these different groups beyond clinical that contribute to TMF. So is there anybody out there that's going, yep, now we just need to convince our companies of that? Because sometimes companies are kind of slower to see that and say, hey, well, is TMF really involving other groups? And the answer is it absolutely does. So now we've got this term that's been around really longer than I have, which is a pretty long time, and the term is essential documents. What are essential documents? Well, it's kind of a strange term because it's been around for a really long time, but it's really evolved over the last 30 years. So essential documents are those documents that individually and collectively allow for the evaluation of the conduct of the trial. So they do allow for you to assess the trial. They look at the quality of the data, and then they kind of are the documents that demonstrate compliance with GCP. Now, that sounds a lot like a TMF, right? And so Section 8.1 of ICH GCP defines it exactly as that, essential documents. So they don't really call out TMF. And so oftentimes people say, oh, well, we just collect essential documents. And my answer is, well, what are essential documents? Because essential documents go well beyond what's listed in the original ICH 8.1, right? We know that anything that contributes to the story is part of the TMF. Essentially, we started thinking of TMF as a filing cabinet. Records on a shelf covered by plastic or a drawer in an office where we just kept all our quote essential documents.